Bitcoin is magical to people the first time they use it. Obviously, there are some times, depending on what app you use, where it's not magical, but the potential for the first experience to be magical is way higher than it was 4 years ago. The problems of inflation and the affordability crisis are going to continue to rise, which could lead to massive disruptions to the job market, which could make people even more desperate and seeking answers. Bitcoin truly is the best money that man has ever come into contact with. Everybody's going to use it, including institutions, including governments. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's important for people to make sure they do the work too. Make sure they're holding their keys and understanding what's going on at the very least. Don't cater to ESG because they don't really care about energy or any of that. That's not their intention. That's their facade behind the power they would like to exert over you. You can't be against Bitcoin. It's like being against the cell phone or the internet.
Hello and welcome from Bitcoin Vegas 2025. I'm Afret with You're the Voice.
And I'm Ben from Crypto Talks.
And we're here today at a collaboration. We're going to interview a series of guests here in Vegas, and we'll introduce each one of them for you, and then we'll roll with the episodes.
The episodes are going to be released on both You're the Voice and Crypto Talks, so make sure you're subscribed to both. Our next guest is Marty Bent. Marty is a Bitcoin investor, writer, and media entrepreneur, best known as the managing partner of 1031, a venture capital firm focused on Bitcoin infrastructure. He is also the founder of TFTC, where he publishes widely read Bitcoin newsletter and hosts the TFTC podcast.
סדרת הפודקאסטים שהוקלטה בביטקוין וגאס 2025 מובאת לכם בחסות B2C. B2C היא הבורסת קריפטו הראשונה המפוקחת בישראל שפועלת עם רישיון מטעם רשות שוק ההון, ביטוח וחיסכון ומאפשרת לכם לקנות, למכור, לסחור בביטקוין ומטבעות דיגיטליים 24 שעות ביממה פה בישראל ובשקלים. אם אתם מעוניינים להירשם לבורסה, אתם מוזמנים לעשות זאת בלינק שמופיע לכם ברגע זה בתיאור הסרטון. ואם אתם כבר רשומים בבורסה, אז דעו כי אתם יכולים להזמין חברים ולקבל 50 שקלים עבור כל חבר בהתאם לתקנון. מוזמנים להיכנס ללינק. אני רוצה גם להזכיר לכם ששום דבר שהאורחים בפרק או אפרת ואני אומרים לא צריך או יכול לשמש כהמלצה לפעולה או כייעוץ השקעות. אתם ילדים גדולים, תקבלו את ההחלטות שלכם עבור עצמכם ותהנו מהפרק.
Marty Bent, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me off the plane into the suite here.
Into the suite, into the dream world of Vegas.
First time here. Very excited. This is the way I get to start my trip, though.
Unbelievable.
We are too.
We are ecstatic to have you on. Thanks for agreeing. Like, this is a dream come true.
Yeah, this is really a great opportunity to say it on record as well. Thank you so much for your content, even though it should be in the end of the podcast.
We'll say it at the beginning.
We'll say it in the beginning. Thank you. We really appreciate you and your work, and we're happy to be in a place where we get to ask you some questions about it as well.
You're an inspiration, and we'll stop embarrassing you for now. Okay, so we're in Vegas, Sin City, where people gamble and play to earn fiat.
Sure.
What a place to do a Bitcoin conference.
Oxymoronic.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So that makes me like wonder how this contrast is representing the state of society today, like the milking of energy, time, and fiat from people on all those slot machines. Like, what does it make you feel, that contrast between the way humanity is today and what we're seeing here in Vegas?
I like to be optimistic and hope that having a Bitcoin conference in the heart of the degenerate high velocity crash.
Beam of light.
Yeah, it's like hey, here's maybe where you should go. But no, I mean, I should have expected it, but I hopped off the airplane. There's like slots and machines.
In the airport, yeah.
It's they literally try to grab your attention as soon as you get off and like come over here and spend your money and gamble. And I don't know, I do think it is poetic and a very interesting way, in the sense that like Bitcoin is a way for people to get away from that. And
exactly.
When I worry about those, that here in the United States particularly, like we were just talking about Philadelphia legalized gambling in the last 10 or 15 years, and there has been this culture of gambling by the sports arenas, which are all congregated together down in South Philly. And I don't know, just this whole culture of downloading a sports app or going to a sports book in person and trying to make it all back on a parlay or a bet seems to be increasing. And I think that's a sign of a broader and deeper rot in society, which is people feel like they can't make enough money going to work and doing something honest and something with integrity, and they're forced to go try and gamble to make it all back or to actually get ahead, which is sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with you too. So I want to start with you, or we want to start with the genesis of Tales from the Crypt. Why did it start? How did it start? Tell us more about the content creation process and your role.
So it started almost 8 years. We're 2 weeks away from the 8-year anniversary of the first ever newsletter that I sent out. So that's how it started. Started as a newsletter. It was June of 2017. And at that point in that Bitcoin cycle, the price had gone up. It had gone up above $1,000 right below and was getting ready to go back up again. And my friends and family knew that I was the Bitcoin guy. I'd been talking obsessively about Bitcoin for about 4 years at that point, and I was getting an influx of emails and texts and calls, and I was like, you know what, stop reaching out to me via these avenues. I'll reach out to you via this newsletter. So I started the newsletter. I think it had 15 to 20 emails on it of friends and family. Sent it out on June 8th, 2017, then started sharing it on Twitter. I think I had like 400 followers or something like that, but got the attention of people in the space, and they started retweeting the links, and the list started growing. And over the course of that summer, I met somebody at Barstool Sports in New York, where I was living at the time, and had the opportunity to get a drink with him. And he had read the newsletter, was interested about Bitcoin and tweeting about it. So I said, let's meet up. And I was sort of, I think, subconsciously vying for like a writing and blogging job at Barstool at the time. But I met the guy and I was like, hey, Barstool interested in somebody to write about Bitcoin while the price is going up? And he's like, no. Or okay, blogging sort of going by the wayside, but you should start a podcast. And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. I have no idea how to do that. Can you help me? And he said yes. He was gracious enough to say yes. So over the course of the summer, we sort of brainstormed the first episode, which is funny looking back. We literally spent a month thinking of our first episode, literally scripted it. And I believe in September, we recorded it and then launched in the world. And at that point, it was a history of Bitcoin up to that point in 2017. And then shortly thereafter, started interviewing people like Pierre Richard, Matt Corallo, James O'Byrne, a bunch of developers in the space, and just kept chugging over the course of 8 years now, doing both of those. But along the way, obviously, really leaned in. So our rabbit hole recap with Matt Odell. Together, we joined 1031 to help invest in the space and help Bitcoin-focused companies grow and scale. It's been a crazy ride. To think 2017, at that point, I was unemployed when I started the newsletter. So if you would have told me right that first day when I started Marty's Bent that 8 years later I'd be in a beautiful suite in Las Vegas talking about Bitcoin and getting interviewed about it, I thought you were crazy. But it's been a fun journey. But to your point about the content, how I make it, I think it's just whatever. Marty's Bent, the tagline for the first 4 years before we moved off of MailChimp and on the Ghost, was the definition of bent, or one definition of bent, which is inclination or what one's interest is. And so the tagline was, Marty's Bent is my inclination, is a representation of my inclination towards the information I found interesting in Bitcoin over the last 24 hours. So for the newsletter, I try to write it 5 days a week, and the content process is like, all right, what's been sticking in my head the most over the last day, and is it good enough to write about it? So like, sit down, get these thoughts in my head into paper and send them out to them.
I saw you recently doing a talk I think it was in Austin, where you were telling your story. You did like a presentation about TFTC and the origins and everything, and you were sharing about the newsletter, going into podcasting, not knowing like where this is going to go. And I mean, looking at your legacy and what you've done until today is quite unique in this space. Like literally a one-man show pulling a media company out of nothing. And you were talking about AI there, and that was very interesting. I mean, I heard you say that you reached a level of automation that allows you to be a lot more efficient, sophisticated. I think Ben will be interested in that as well.
Please.
Yeah, he's looking for his media company, like, how do I get even more efficient with my content? So what are some tips you can give about AI and your media?
Yeah. Well, I think at some point recently, in like the last 6 months, I realized that there was a disconnect between people who read the newsletter and people who listened to the podcast or even watch us on YouTube. There's like 3 buckets of people who consumed our content in different ways. And shame on me, one-man show, didn't realize. I just always assumed that everybody had.
Not at all.
Not at all.
People have their preferences and they're very different in how they.
So I understood if you read I assumed if you read the newsletter, you knew the podcast exists, and likewise, you knew the YouTube exists. But that became pretty clear to me 6 months ago. This is not the case.
It's true.
What we've been working on in an attempt to basically create a flywheel that lets people know that we have all these different sort of media mediums through which we're putting the media through. We've been leveraging AI to sort of repurpose podcast content, particularly to put it in the newsletter to let people know, like, hey, we did a podcast, we talked about this, and here's a link to the podcast. So you
As
should
text?
check.
Like
Yes.
transcribing it?
And so that's what we've set up in automated flow. So whenever we record a podcast, we'll take that audio file, send it to an AI transcription, like Assembly AI or Riverside's AI, depending on particular episode. Sometimes Assembly is better than Riverside. But then we'll take that, and we've been working on prompts, Claude, specifically iterating on them for months now, that really try to not only bring our voice, but hone in on very specific topics and sections of a particular conversation and pull out a summary that is human readable, makes sense, and is interesting. So that's one way we've been leveraging it. So every day in the newsletter now, you'll see that we have Marty's Bent, and then we have another section, which is essentially what we believe to be like a high value piece of content from a conversation we've had on the podcast, just put it in written form and link back to the podcast. And that process is literally dump an audio file, triggers transcription, like it's automatically sent to Claude, which produces a number of outputs, and then we pick the ones that make the most sense and then dump it into the newsletter. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms
It's
of
very cool. Yeah.
what we think we could do in terms of automating a lot of these processes.
Yeah, you're right. We can go so much more sophisticated on the kind of automation you can do with content.
And I assume you already see the results, right?
Oh yes. Yeah. The newsletter growth has been substantial in the last 6 months. That's partly because we've been mentioning on the podcast more, but likewise, the podcast has been growing pretty well. And anecdotally, outside of the numbers, we can see a number of people have been emailing me, like, I wish you would have told me you had a podcast. I was at a meetup last night with somebody who's well known in the Bitcoin space, who became friends in Austin. His brother, I've known his brother now for 4 years, and we've seen each other many times a year over the last 4 years.
You have a podcast?
He was literally like, I had no idea. You had a podcast.
What?
Brother's best friend. Like, I thought you would know that.
That's hilarious.
I guess that's a lesson in don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
Seriously.
So AI is definitely another tool to make sure we content creators reach more people. But when we reach them, we do want to ensure that the content is tailored towards what we want them to get from us. How do you do that with individuals that are new to Bitcoin? Like, what kind of funnels do you have, or what do you see as the right process to get to them?
That's, I think Twitter, or X, formerly Twitter, is a great. I've been using that, and it's funny. I sort of, the content, the creative process is sort of dynamic with the price of Bitcoin. So during bear markets, I'll get highly technical because I know there's no newcomers coming. And so I'll focus to an audience that's hanging around and wants to really lean into what's happening on like the technical side of Bitcoin. So you could probably go back and read bear market newsletters are more technical, get into the weeds. But now, as the bull market's rearing up, I've been doing this on X and in the newsletter, which is like getting back to basics of like very simple, high level topics.
Yeah.
So like today on the plane, right before I came here, I wrote about monetary premium in real estate. What is that? How does Bitcoin fix it? So we're trying to highlight a problem that exists in the fiat world that people may not understand what the core of that problem is, and sort of identify, like, I know you have this problem because I have it too. Real estate is extremely expensive in the United States. It's only going up. But there's an affordability crisis in many parts of the country. Why is that? And explain why that is. And oh, by the way, like Bitcoin helps solve this. I think in terms of converting newcomers, it's always identify a problem, say, hey, I have that problem too, and present a solution.
All right, let's talk a bit about decentralized protocols, open source protocols. How do you see open source code and everything? How do you see the future of media, independent media, podcasting, Nostr, and all that? Like, is that the future in your opinion?
Podcast
Or
2.0.
yeah,
I mean, I think independent media is the present. Whether or not that independent media will be distributed and operate on these open protocols, I think is yet to be determined. But I'm very optimistic that it can. And I mean, podcasting 2.0, I've said this very publicly. It's awesome. I've been using it since 2021 when it first launched, or 2020. I think TFTC was one of the first 3 podcasts on podcasting 2.0. So we've had a Lightning address with payment splits in RSS feed for 4 years now. And over the course of that 4 years, we've accumulated a lot of sats. But if we're being honest, like the amount of people using podcasting 2.0 compatible apps with Bitcoin wallets in them is a very small percentage.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not. Well, it was a very small percentage of our overall listener base on the podcast, on the RSS feed, has grown over time. So right now, I checked the stats yesterday. I think 14% of people that listen to our podcast listen via Fountain. So that's a
pretty high.
2.0 app.
Wow.
So that,
yeah, but that's probably like one of the most successful podcasts on that platform.
yeah. And so we've got 14% of our listeners listen via podcasting 2.0 app, at least one that we know of. And we do have people streaming sats to us pretty much every minute of every day. But can that scale to run a business? I think that's yet to be determined.
Right.
But in terms of getting it out there and make it possible to monetize that way has never been easier. And the fact that it exists is incredible. Then when you get to censorship resistance, I think that's where a lot of the actual staying power of independent media distributed via these protocols is going to be things like Nostr, and even RSS for that matter. I think that is the future in the sense, especially in the world of AI, where I think this is an area where many in Silicon Valley and other tech forward people who aren't really focused on Bitcoin or Nostr specifically are not seeing what's happening. And I think Google's release of video 3 or 4, whatever they launched last week, and I'm sure you've seen the videos online of people just
The AI video. Yeah, I did. It's crazy.
It's very crazy. And it's getting to the point where, what was it, 3 years ago, they had those really creepy videos of Will Smith trying to eat spaghetti. And that was that was the cutting edge of video generated AI, or AI generated video at that point. And to see how fast it's progressed since then is insane. If you just project that forward, like, we're not too far from a situation where you could have, like, I have so much, I have such a big corpus of content, video, audio, that somebody's going to literally be able to prompt Google and create a video of me doing something.
Yeah.
And optimistically, me doing something funny, pessimistically, realistically, me doing something weird that I would not ever do, but people won't be able to tell the difference. So I think the process of normalizing a content creator signing a piece of content with a private key is going to be a necessity at some point in the next decade as those AI generated videos become more and more mature and more human-like. And so something like Nostr makes that very easy. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get to a point in the next 5 years where if you don't sign a private key before you post a message or sign a private key with your message,
It's not
that I know is
authenticated.
you, I don't trust that video at all.
Mhm.
So I think open protocols like Nostr are going to be necessary. Very
Super
necessary.
interesting. And do you see like a trend on that end to discuss that further? Like to bring, other than your podcast as well, like how would you recommend other content creators to bring attention to this kind of problem and how Nostr solves it?
So we had Nostriga at the end of last year, right before the Baltic Honey Badger conference, and that was a big topic. And I think the first step to do is to just produce content there. Just literally, that's what Nostr needs right now is more content.
Yep.
And the lowest hanging fruit to drive awareness and to support open protocols like Nostr is just simply cross post. If you're posting on X, if you're posting on YouTube, that's the beauty of it. You can post both content types on Nostr via many different clients that exist. And so I think that's what Nostr needs is a bigger, wider, more diverse type of content right now. I've been begging for FinTwit on Nostr.
That's why I'm there, and that's why I'm begging for automation from the developers. Just help me. Like, I want to put all my short clips there, but it's just too much work to do it manually.
That's what we're working on.
Please help me with automating this.
AI flows that are automating this. So but that's where it gets tricky with Nostr specifically because you have the private key nature. Like, do you want to give the AI a private key?
Right.
So like,
True. That's a problem.
Can you give the AI the ability to just get there and set things up for you to sign? I think that would be ideal, where it's not you having to copy, paste, upload. That does all of it.
I'm happy to go once a day and tell the AI, do that like I do today with my Chrome add-on, like give permission for the next 5 hours.
Yeah, that would be great.
Happy to do that.
Yeah. And the devs are working on it. I hear they're working on it.
I'm happy to hear that.
Happy. Yeah. So last question in terms of the content creation aspect of things. I follow many podcasts, and there's a theme that I see with people that hosted many people is that they have their own inspiration of regular guests or maybe guests that their concept just stuck with you, that they create a process for you to formulate your own opinions and narratives and then like set the stage for others as well. So who would be your like top 3, top 5 kind of guests that inspired you and gave you like educated you on how to do things yourself, how to learn things yourself, so you can do your work better?
Yeah,
it's a tough one, I know.
It's a tough one. There's so many good ones out there. But I think top of mind, in terms of doing my work, like people are like Whitney Webb has been on the show 5 or 6 times, maybe even 7 times at this point. But I think she's an incredibly thorough journalist, and I think her commitment to the beat is something I really respect. I just love having conversations with Whitney. And I think most importantly with her, she's an incredible, like, keep 'em honest force where she's highly skeptical of many things, and Bitcoin included to a certain degree, or some of the ways people are using Bitcoin. So I love that in terms of like keeping me honest and just of thinking of the world completely differently. I think my conversations with Tom Luongo and his thesis on what the Fed is doing and the sort of the Federal Reserve versus the European bankers was something that
the last one you had was awesome.
Yeah, it was a line of thinking I wasn't privy to until I started having conversations with him, and he makes a very compelling case. So I think in terms of looking out at the macroeconomic landscape and different policy decisions, conversations with him have definitely brought a different lens and perspective on how to read all of those. Matthew Mazinchis from Crypto Voices, we've been doing a quarterly monetary base update global monetary base update and just tracking how Bitcoin is how Bitcoin is compared to other monetary based currencies like the dollar, the yuan. That's been incredible because I think it's really helped me hone in on like what statistics and data to actually look at to get a signal of how Bitcoin is doing in terms of its actual competition as a monetary base currency.
Yeah.
And so those have been great. Developers like Matt Corallo and James O'Byrne have been on a bunch. Pierre Rochard was the first ever guest. He's been on a few times since then, and I just think Pierre is an incredible, unabashed bull who is actually funny, articulate, and convincing, which are those three combined is incredibly powerful. So the way he approaches everything from analytics, humor, and persuasion is something that has definitely made me think about how I write and how I set up questions and explain Bitcoin to people as well.
Speaking of explaining Bitcoin to people, there was one time where you were a guest on Tom's podcast, I think, and he was acknowledging you for being one of those people that he can actually talk about Bitcoin without becoming too upset or too like anti about it, because he described most Bitcoiners as being assholes and not really easy to talk about because they all go like have fun staying poor and don't really care about him. And he brings all of his claims, which some of them are really interesting. Some of them I think he was like either misinformed or like uninformed about certain things. And I loved how you had the patience to really like you were being very humble with him and speaking eye level to him, and that goes a long way to people that are outside of the Bitcoin community and want to come in, but on their own terms. You know what I mean? So I really like that. Like you have a way to really understand how to speak to people without making them too scared or run away from this cult called Bitcoin. So
well, that's I think it's very important, particularly as somebody interviewing others. It's
right. You need to be able to.
I am trying to educate the audience, but at the end of the day, I have a guest on, and I'm very curious to hear their thoughts. And so, I'm not trying to like inject my bias or.
Yeah.
I think coming in with the humility to be like, maybe I could be wrong. Let's hear them out. And I'm just like a very chill, slow. I talk very slow, which triggers a lot of people. Most of you probably
that's great.
But I just got. I think that's the way I approach life. Is I have very strong opinions and think the world works in particular ways, and like to think I have a good sense and good grasp on reality and what Bitcoin is and how it can affect everything. But I'm not going to be an asshole about it. I think, and then to your point, I think it's a great way to create like an olive branch. Like, all right, wasn't up my ass and. He's talking slow and pretty chill. Like maybe he's on something.
All right. So let's talk about 1031. You invest exclusively in Bitcoin infrastructure. Is that right?
Yes.
Why is that choice? And like, what's your criteria to choosing companies? How do you guys build that?
So to answer the first question, why is because I've been in Bitcoin for 12 years now. Been 1031 for 4 years. So about a third of the time I've been in Bitcoin. And for the longest time, between 2017 and 2021, running TFTC, running Rabbit Hole Recap with Matt, particularly with Rabbit Hole Recap, we would go over the news items of the week, a lot of which pertain to companies and what they were launching and products that were coming to market. And it blew our mind just getting to know all the founders, really understanding the products, understanding the gravity of Bitcoin and where it's going, and looking out at the investment landscape of where money was actually being deployed and noticing that it was extremely hard for founders that were focused on Bitcoin only and building companies around Bitcoin specifically to actually raise money to build what they wanted to build. And if you look at the amount of venture capital that has been raised for broader crypto versus Bitcoin specifically, Bitcoin companies specifically, over the course of the last 10, 15 years, it's orders of magnitude, literally 100, 200 to $1 for broader crypto versus Bitcoin. And so part of the reason 1031 exists is to notice that there is this sort of imbalance and over-indexing towards a part of the market that may be more hype than actual substance, and not only viewing that as an opportunity from an investment perspective, but an opportunity for Bitcoin is like there are people focused on Bitcoin, building companies around it that are having trouble getting funding because everybody's distracted with broader crypto. So it's incumbent on us to go out with the thesis that we're going to invest in Bitcoin companies, not because we're ideologues, but because there's an incredible opportunity. If Bitcoin becomes the reserve currency of the world, the companies building the infrastructure that makes that transition possible are going to certainly benefit from that. And so we went out and raised a fund in 2021 and 2022. We just made the first close on our third fund, and we're very happy to have supported 35 companies in the space to date, and plan on continuing to do that and scaling that up over time as it becomes clear that there is a difference between Bitcoin and crypto. So I think the thesis has only been validated and is getting stronger year on year. But in terms of the companies that we invest in across the landscape, so mining infrastructure companies like Giga and Upstream Data, which are building infrastructure for people to utilize stranded or underutilized energy to mine Bitcoin. Companies like Strike are the largest investors in Strike, basically building a Bitcoin company on-ramp, on-off-ramp, Lightning infrastructure globally, available around the globe. Companies like Unchained, building on Bitcoin's multi-sig primitives to bring financial services and custody solutions to market. Battery Finance, which we're really excited about, which is at this intersection of structured credit and Bitcoin. And then hardware companies like CoinKite, which builds the cold card, and Start9, which builds basically an at-home server they can run Bitcoin nodes and other stuff on. So I guess broadly speaking, our thesis is we want to invest in companies that make it easier for people to utilize Bitcoin, whether that's people in the oil field who want to turn methane into electricity, into hashes, into Bitcoin, people who simply don't want to hold their Bitcoin in an exchange, so they need a hardware wallet, people that don't have Bitcoin but need to buy some from an exchange, people that have a good amount of Bitcoin and want to do something with it without selling, so using it as collateral. And then moving out, I think companies like Battery really bringing Bitcoin into Bitcoinizing the traditional financial system by recollateralizing all the bad that exists out there.
All the value chain.
Yeah,
That's incredible. Why 1031?
1031 is an homage to the white paper, October 31st. We did not think of the 1031 real estate tax treatment that exists here in the United States, but it is our goal to make sure that when people hear 1031 is synonymous with Bitcoin and not real estate tax arbitrage.
A lot of AI SEO is going to need to do that. Cool. Okay, let's talk more about Bitcoin mining and energy and sustainability. So you talked about Giga and the other company, and that's part of your focus. We know that there's this intersection between Bitcoin mining and climate change, and basically using this narrative of climate crisis and that drawing the picture that Bitcoin energy consumption is essentially ruining the planet and polluting the planet and all of that. And it's a topic that the three of us are very aligned as to is it actually true, and how essentially it is used to justify things and justify more taxes and more control, etc. But in the Bitcoin space, we see it as something different. So we wanted for you to elaborate a bit more than that. How do you see this intersection between Bitcoin energy consumption, climate change, and actually releasing energy or utilizing energy in the space? And
we talk about climate realism, right? We not really climate change. I mean, that's the pervasive narrative that we want to stay away. I think you've seen one of my tweets about this. Like, I hate people simping to that narrative just to get into the mainstream conversation about climate change and get some budgets or attention. I don't think the Bitcoin community needs to do that, but for some reason it happens a lot.
It does. And that was on stage here at this conference, I believe in 2021 or 2022, talking about ESG. And I was on stage with a bunch of publicly traded miner CEOs who were beating the drum about we're going to lean into ESG. And I was just saying,
this panel.
Don't cater to ESG because they don't really care about energy or any of that. Like, that's not their intention. That's their facade behind the power they would like to exert over you. And I think luckily since then, the tide around ESG and cataclysmic climate change has changed dramatically. But even if you wanted to accept the assumptions that there is, like, Bitcoin mining is inarguably a benefit for people that care about that, because Bitcoin miners are a buyer of first and last resort. Last resort being if you have energy that you're producing that's not being utilized, either because there's no demand from the grid or no ability to get that energy to market because it's stuck on a well pad upstream. Bitcoin miners can come in as a last resort, soak up that energy, make sure it's being utilized. So again, going back to I'm a surfer, I grew up and I'm very passionate about cleaning the beach. If you go to the beach and you bring stuff and you don't clean up after yourself, I get very pissed off. That was one thing. I was the hall monitor of the beach, like, pick up your trash. And so, like, I am an environmentalist at the end of the day, in the sense that, like, I want to leave the world better than I want to leave it better than when it was when I came in. And Bitcoin allows you to do this. If you're going to produce energy, if you're going to drill for oil and gas, if you're going to create nuclear facilities and hydro facilities, wind and solar farms, like, you want to make sure you're utilizing every molecule, every electron for the benefit of humanity. And Bitcoin makes that very simple because it is location agnostic. And since it's a distributed market, a distributed network, you can have miners of many different scales, from a bit-ax all the way up to a gigawatt facility, utilizing wasted energy as a provider of last resort. Buyer first resort. Here in the United States, a big thing in the last couple of weeks has been the nuclear executive orders that are sort of ripping off the red tape and allowing companies building small modular reactors and bigger facilities to giving them some breathing room to go out and do their thing. But they do have this problem, which is it's extremely capital intensive. And if you're going to build all this new nuclear generation, you have a problem. You can build it, but then you need transmission. And considering how capital intensive nuclear energy is in its current form, it's very expensive to build something and have to wait for transmission so you can begin making revenue off of it. So in this case, Bitcoin miners act as a buyer of first resort, where you can put down an SMR or build a large facility. And while you're waiting 18 to 24 months for transmission lines to get built out to grids, Bitcoin miners can operate what's called behind the meter, and you can monetize that nuclear facility via Bitcoin mining almost immediately. And so you don't have that time delay of when you actually set up to when you start making revenue. It can be automatic.
Interesting. Wow.
And so it helps if you believe that, if you're a strong believer that cataclysmic climate change exists and is being driven predominantly by hydrocarbons, you should probably also believe that they should be replaced by something like nuclear. And if you believe that, Bitcoin mining helps with that. And even wind and solar, which I'm not a massive fan of, but we can make the argument that it helps there too.
Yeah. I remember there was an article back then in Canada about this water boiler that used to have a miner.
Mhm.
Do you remember that?
Yep.
Are you aware of how it's going for them right now? And are you familiar with also these kind of funny small solutions that might be revolutionary when you think of it?
I mean, I think a lot of that activity is happening in sort of the, what would you call it, indie mining space, where you have a lot of people, particularly interested in the BitAxe project, like engaged in open source sort of experiments of tinkering with their own machines, with their own homes, sharing it on the internet, and sort of giving feedback and iterating on it. But there are, shout out to Tyler and his team they work out of Denver at Space there. I think they're highly focused on, and he wrote a book with Brains about Bitcoin heat reuse. And I was at a conference with him earlier this year, and he was explaining that if you were to get 2% of HVAC systems in the world and convince them to heat the water to a certain point with Bitcoin miners, you would, I believe, like 2 or 3x Bitcoin's hash rate as it's did today. So there's a lot of inefficiency out there. People are using HVAC systems, water boilers, and it's essentially just a drain. You're draining energy from the system. You're getting nothing back. But imagine if you could use a hashing board of a miner to heat the water to a certain degree, or to create waste heat that you could blow throughout a house and actually make money while doing that. Like it's fascinating. And there are, I think it's very early days.
Very cool.
We've talked about this for a while. Bitcoin mining, like the market for ASICs needs to be commoditized to a certain degree, where it makes it very easy to sort of get these ASIC chips and plug them into hash boards and different form factors. And they need to be cheap enough to do this at scale. And I think we're approaching that point. So Tyler and companies like Heatbit are really beginning to put pen to paper and think seriously about solving this problem at scale. And I think that's another area that could definitely explode in the next decade in a good way.
Amazing.
Especially as energy becomes more and more expensive. All right. What are the trends or trajectories that pose the biggest threats on Bitcoin today?
Those are the biggest threats on Bitcoin. I think apathy, people not caring about what gives Bitcoin value in the first place, which is the fact that it's distributed, decentralized network, dependent on individuals. There's a lot of institutions and publicly traded companies and very wealthy individuals involved in Bitcoin. But I think in the long term, if Bitcoin's going to survive, individuals that are just common, everyday men need to care about what makes Bitcoin valuable in the first place and ensure that it's sufficiently distributed and robust. And so,
like running nodes.
Running nodes, but I think at the very least, just holding your own keys in some capacity, even if it's in a collaborative custody model, just keeping everything honest. Because I don't know if it's materialized yet, but if you get too apathetic and you hold your Bitcoin with trusted third parties, you have no visibility into what Bitcoin you actually own in terms of having visibility into an on-chain public address that is allocated to you. You could get into the same problems that led to the downfall of the gold standard, which was rehypothecation and paper bills. I think there's a lot of focus on the institutions today, and I don't think the institutions are bad at all. It makes sense. We've been talking about this game theory for well over a decade. If Bitcoin truly is the best money that man has ever come into contact with, everybody's going to use it, including institutions, including governments, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's important for people, if they care, to make sure they do the work, to make sure they're holding their keys and understanding what's going on at the very least.
What other trends?
Yeah.
It's interesting that you chose apathy,
Yeah.
right? But when you look at other things like quantum computing or other things that you would say that the community, be it the developers or the miners or the individuals, need to be much more alert on, including governments, right? So that's also somewhat of a threat when you have executive order 6102 examples.
Yeah, quantum I'm not as worried about as any other people are. I've been going to a lot of bit devs in Austin recently, and that's been a hot topic. And if you go on the Bitcoin dev mailing list, there's been a lot of really interesting sort of discussions around quantum resistant cryptographic libraries that could be ported into Bitcoin. I think we have enough time to sort of have those discussions and figure out what the best solution is to that particular problem, if and when it arises. Bitcoin mining pools very centralized right now, and this is due to the nature of their payout schemes. Full pay per share payout schemes, I think, are acting as this centralizing force at the mining pool layer, which is certainly not ideal, but I don't think a systemic risk to the network, because we've seen this in Bitcoin before. In 2015, when Ghash got 55% of the network hash rate, miners sort of recognized, like, oh my gosh, this one pool has 55%. We got to move our hash rate off. And that was an example of miners sort of perceiving a potential threat to the network and acting rather quickly to ensure that the network wasn't that threat. And so if that were to arise again, I wouldn't be surprised if the market reacted very similarly. Going back to like self-custody, I think I've had recent conversations with a bunch of developers, and something I sort of stayed away from the last 2 years because it was very controversial. But I think this idea of covenants, specifically covenants like op CTV, check template verify, may be necessary to ensure that you have a sufficient number of people properly securing their own keys and giving them the ability to self-custody. And if that's what I want to see, if I'm worried about people getting apathetic about that, I think conversations around are covenants worthy, or are they necessary? If so, which covenants proposal is most worthy of getting into Bitcoin? I think it may be time to begin having those conversations, and more seriously than we have in the last 2 years. Yeah, I'm honestly not that worried about Bitcoin. I say all this, but I think the incentives of the system are such that whenever there's a perceived threat, or it seems like Bitcoin's at risk of going in a wrong direction, the market of Bitcoiners like stands up, reacts, and says, no, this is too important to mess up. And so the left side of the bell curve, caveman to me, is like, if something arises, we'll figure it out because it's too important not to figure it out.
Of course. So we spoke about the negative sides, like the things we should be wary about, but what about the new monetary order, right? So we have many trends that are going up at the moment right now, be it gold and its adoption, or prices rising, be it the geopolitical aspects and the wars and the tariff and all of that. What do you see in the coming years are the trends that will be more beneficial to Bitcoin? Bitcoin connects better with them and therefore increases adoption, and obviously what comes with that.
I think to go back to what we were saying earlier, I think the problems of inflation and the affordability crisis are going to continue to rise, and then that's going to smash headfirst potentially with this AI explosion, which could lead to massive disruptions to the job market, which could make people even more desperate and seeking answers. So I think one thing is, and I think that's been a big admission of the Trump administration over the last 2 weeks, is, hey, we're going to sign this big, beautiful tax bill, but it looks like a massive spending bill. And Scott Bessent has been out there publicly, basically implicitly saying, like, yeah, we're going to issue more debts and we're going to choose to default via debasement, implicitly, not explicitly. But if you read between the lines, that's what he says. You had Elon come out last week and tweet that we're just going to turn the economy, we're going to turn it on turbo. Basically, we're going to run the debt up and try to just increase productivity and GDP at a faster rate and hope that we can thread that needle. And so I think that's happening. And if you just look at what's happened from 2020 to 2025 in terms of inflation and the affordability crisis, it's only accelerated. And so if that continues, more people are going to be asking questions, and I think they'll turn to Bitcoin. And then in terms of what's happening in Bitcoin, I think just if you compare it to cycles past, like I think it's always interesting to go back and think about how easy it is to buy and send Bitcoin for somebody going from like 0 to 1. Like I remember when I first got in, it was like the tail end of Mt. Gox failing and Coinbase was around, and it wasn't hard to download Coinbase and buy Bitcoin, but then like getting it off Coinbase was hard. So I got to buy this wallet, and it's not really clear to me. And then you go to 2017 and you just think of all the volatility that existed there in terms of infrastructure was probably about the same. But now you go to 2025, in this cycle specifically, I think 2021 was a little bit suppressed because of the FTX stuff. And so I think we have like a true cycle here now when you look at the proliferation of the Lightning Network, all the wallets that have enabled that, and the ability to get on Nostr and set up an NPub and have people send you Bitcoin immediately without even having to set up an account, without even having to set up a wallet with the way they've implemented eCash. It's much easier to go from 0 to 1 to receive Bitcoin. So I think the infrastructure and the tooling is at a mature point where Bitcoin is magical to people the first time they use it in some senses. Obviously, there are some times, depending on what app you use, where it's not magical, but the potential for the first experience to be magical is way higher than it was only 4 years ago. And then, like, I think, like, what's happening here with the institutions and the corporations getting in, whether we like it or not, as humans are susceptible to the herd mentality and are very social.
Do you like it or not?
I mean, I don't like it or not. Like, it just, it can be frustrating at times.
Yeah.
Like, I do feel like the man in the corner, like, wanting to shake people. Like, I've been saying this for 12 years. But whether we like it or not, like, people...
it is what it is.
Yeah, people allocate trust to third parties and particular individuals. If you have Larry Fink and the Trumps and even liberal politicians like Ro Khanna beginning to say, like, Bitcoin is...
It's exactly what Mark said.
You can't be against Bitcoin. It's like being against the cell phone or the internet. And I think we're reaching a social tipping point, too, where there's too many people that are well respected by the masses that are saying, no, this is real, this is happening, that it's going to be like, okay, Bitcoin does. I'm not gonna fight my crazy brother-in-law at the dinner table anymore, because it turns out he's not crazy.
It's actually quite interesting that you said at the beginning that so many members of your family and friends right at the beginning were asking you questions. It's like, statistically, I think that's normally not the way it is, that you have so many people interested around you. Most people just dismissed it so early on. So how come you have this pocket of, I don't know, maybe more based people, individuals, or more suspicious, or I don't know where it comes from, but
that, or
it's interesting.
I was very,
or you were very vocal about it,
particularly in college. So I found Bitcoin in college, and whenever we would go out to the bars or just
you were
be sitting
enchanted,
around talking about it, like, guys, Bitcoin. And,
okay.
Then after college, I'd go out in New York and I'd force people. I have a buddy who I used to force people to download Coinbase, and I'd make them pay for the tab with their credit card, and then I would send them Bitcoin for
just
to
to orange pill them.
Just like, I have one friend who I see every Christmas when I get home to Philadelphia, and he comes up to me. I think in 2015, like in the depths of the bear market, I paid he paid for the tip, he paid for the tab, and I sent him my half of it.
And did he keep it?
He holds his Coinbase up to me every Christmas. He's like, look at this.
Look what happened to it.
But he still didn't buy.
No more. He kept the one. He kept what I gave him. But I don't know if he's. I don't know, but it's a fun tradition that we have where, like, and it's a material amount of money now for him. And it's like, this is what Bitcoin does.
I try to do it in weddings and when my friends give birth. So I give them only Bitcoin as the present. And this way they come to me the same way after a year or 2, 3 years. Look how much my present is worth now.
Of course.
And it's getting easier to gift. Like,
exactly.
Fold just launched the Bitcoin gift card. There's been many in the past, but you could Sats card from CoinKite. That's typically what I do. I load up a Sats card and put it in the envelope, and
so much fun.
Just leave a note. Just call me when you're ready, because I know you're
exactly.
not
Exactly.
Santa came to visit. All right, Santa, what gives you hope? Where do you draw your hope from?
And these conferences give me a lot of hope. Like, I mean, just been hearing your story, and I'm always reminded when I get together at conferences and events like this, there's people literally all over the world with the same mindset that I have, which is Bitcoin is a solution to a lot of the problems we have. I'm going to dedicate my life to ensuring that I do my best to make sure it succeeds, and that gives me a ton of hope. And then beyond that, like I just think the human spirit is very strong, and despite the times I've grown up in and the overarching surveillance states and the war machine, I do think humans broadly, like speaking, just are good people who want to just have a life of dignity and respect and grow a family, mind their own business, and live in peace.
Yeah.
And we just need ways to manifest incentive systems that make that easier for people who want to live like that. And I think Bitcoin is a solution. So I think the human spirit definitely gives me hope. And then my family, my wife, my boys, and my extended family and friends, I think looking as my children are getting older, looking at them, I'm like, oh wow, you're extremely they're like my oldest, it's crazy in the last 6 months, like he's become crazy inquisitive and curious, and like seeing him want to learn and then actually going and learning things and doing it without my help. I'm like, oh wow, like
It's amazing, huh?
it's that gives me a lot of hope. It's like, oh, before that's just gonna make sure you don't get sucked into the high time preference algo of TikTok and other things.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Or if you do, just understand how powerful it is and
It is.
how it affects you.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with the hope part, right? So we're living in a tricky world, and it's important to have people like us, like what we're trying to do, and people in this conference extending the world, bringing it to other people, that they can understand that it all starts with money. And the moment you understand what money is supposed to be, it helps you understand life better. You appreciate things more. We were talking with Alex and Corian, the producers, about when you sit on a plane. And I had that comment too when I came here. People told me, you're a Bitcoiner, you should be in first class, because I was I was in economy. Yeah. And I was like, why? That means that I can buy less Bitcoin. I want to buy more Bitcoin. I want to use my time better. And it starts with that for me.
Yeah. I flew here Southwest Group C.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Marty, kick ass at the conference. Enjoy.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll see you guys around the next few days.
You will.
Absolutely.
So I have to do it.
Of course. Peace and love, freaks.
Peace and love.